child in the hood of South San Jose. I was maybe 2 or 3 years old. I could barely string meaningful sentences together. I had a lisp, a bad lisp. I was very tiny. We had a few dogs that needed to get their distemper shots. We had a few neighbors that likewise needed their dogs to get vaccinations. My mother volunteered to use her station wagon to drive the local kids and their dogs to the local park that had a vaccination drive for dogs. When we arrived, the line was long. The line was endless. We stood there. Time dragged on. There was nothing to do but stand there with the dogs as they likewise were bored or began messing with the other dogs in the line. The next thing I knew, no one I recognized was around. Where did they go? I wandered up and down the line. No one I knew was there. They were all strangers. I walked to a bathroom looking for my mother. She had a very distinctive cough that I could sometimes hear, like a sonar ping, and then zero in on where she was and find her. But there was no cough. There was no mommy. There was no one I knew. I was abandoned. I was abandoned at the fairground. I was alone. I was lost, abandoned. I was wandering. No one seemed to care about that little white toddler boy wandering in the fairgrounds all alone. I left the grounds and crossed into the street into a neighborhood where eventually a police officer who was walking a beat saw me, and he escorted me to a house that was close by, where he said that he would use their phone to call my mother. I could barely speak my name, and the officer was creepy. Older now, my intuition is that he was perhaps a pedophile. Of course, I will never know, as things did ultimately work out. The police officer did find my mother eventually, very late that night, after she had realized that I was not around, and she called the police department, thinking that I had been kidnapped. Of course, it was not her fault. Yes, I was abandoned for hours and hours before my mother even noticed that I was gone. She had got the neighbor, kids, and dogs, everybody home. Just not me. My mother's psyche to this day rejects that she abandoned me, even if it was unintentional. She seems only able to embrace that she looked the other way too long and I wandered off, and therefore it was my responsibility and therefore my fault. Or someone took me away, but I managed to wander off from them. Again, it was not her fault. In no way did my mother fail as a parent. That's clearly what I have believed was her perspective for my entire life. Moving ahead, when I was 8 years old, I would walk to and from school by myself with the occasional chance that a neighbor kid might happen to walk with me. But it was not the plan nor the intention, it was just random chance if I walked with a pair or a third person. Generally, I walked alone. On an otherwise ordinary day, returning home after school, when I noticed bees swarming all around my head. There were dozens of them. I swiped at them and dashed from them, only to discover that there were not just dozens of bees, hundreds of bees, thousands of bees. They seemed to multiply before my eyes. I could not see where the bees ended. It was as though I was in a storm of bees. It was incredibly strange to see so many bees buzzing together without even a single flower petal in sight. Then there were more. I don't know if there were tens of thousands of bees. It was biblical. Later on, I can tell you that the news reported that there were hundreds of thousands of bees that had descended seemingly out of nowhere, that they compared to the biblical locusts that had spread famine and pestilence across the land. Of course, these were bees. They were not locusts. But those bees were miles away, and something triggered those bees to travel all those miles to me. That's right. By the time I stopped moving, there were thousands of bees all around me. The news would say hundreds of thousands. Apparently, though, they descended around me. I was the epicenter of a multi-city block bee storm. There was no protected eye in the storm. There was only me. The bees crawled on my arms, on my chest, on my legs. They landed on my face and all over my hair. They moved as if they were looking for pollen on me, as if I was some rose or some flower. I was terrified. I froze stiff in place at first. I had no idea what to do. I mean, who walks into a swarm of bees, much less thousands or hundreds of thousands? I imagined them stinging me so much that I would die. They could hurt me for sure, regardless, even if I did not die. I was horrified. But something inspired me. Start moving. So shuffling one foot at a time, not lifting, but dragging slowly forward, one foot then the next. Don't move my head, don't move my hands, do not lean. Breathe slowly so no bee feels my hot breath or my beating chest. It must have taken 15 minutes of nightmarish bee hellscape before I emerged on the far side of the bee swarm without a single sting or incident. The bees peeled off me to rejoin the massive swarm as I exited, as though they did not have any interest in being on me. It was a miracle. I did not have a single sting, despite being in the middle of hundreds of thousands of bees. That evening, my mother was dismayed that the fluke bee storm she had heard about was right here where we lived on my walk home, and that I was in fact in the middle of it. Literally. The time of day she understood matched perfectly, and my story aligned with what she had heard. As if she did not believe me at first. Like most shocking things, nothing changed in our lives because of it. We lived in a rundown, very low-income neighborhood, given how poor we were, and how unpredictable income was from my mother's fixing of televisions and radios. With poor neighborhoods, there seems to often be more willingness to commit crime. On one terrorizing night, a man snuck into our house and into my mother's bedroom, whom my mother recognized as a man that lived down the road. But he held a knife to her throat, and he raped her. Though he would later be arrested, my mother's values and beliefs that people were good and that they should be trusted and not, her values were nuke and paved so that new values would evolve, new survival values, new values for self-preservation and protection. My mother did not believe before in her own possession of a weapon, but after that she went out and bought a Colt 45 pistol. She did not intend to be raped and violated again, much less what he could have done to her children. While on a weekend trip with a friend, Scotty Shaddocks, we came across a rope suspended from a huge tree over a dried pond at the end of a likewise dried waterfall. The rope was unreachable, being 6 or more feet above the pond floor. Resourcefully, though, we managed to get long sticks to catch hold of the rope and pull it up to the higher shore sides where we could get hold of it. I was first, as Scotty was a little afraid. It turns out, though, he might have been right to be timid. I leapt off the side and adventurously flew around on the rope. It was awesome. I was flying. And then it slowed, and I realized the only way off the rope was to drop down those same 6+ feet that I was flying above down to the pond floor with no water. The rope was obviously meant for water play, not ground play, and the idea of the water level was certainly higher than the idea of the ground level. Like video games, I swung back and forth, shifting my body weight to slowly move the rope, to move slowly towards the shore, but I could not get to a place that I felt good enough to let go, so I kept swinging and shifting and swinging. It actually got so fast, I lost control. I began to spin and rotate on the rope as it flailed around and about in all directions. I was panicking, but I still wanted to get far enough to let go and land safely on the ground. Not so far down to the ground from the rope, in the middle. I had to land on an edge. The rope stopped suddenly as I face planted into the tree whose branch the rope was suspended from. Splat! I blacked out. Apparently, falling straight down from the trunk of the tree where I had impacted. Bruised, scraped, and head battered, probably concussion, I came to and returned, limping to the house that we were staying in. Scotty's parents looked concerned that they let me get so hurt on their watch. It didn't seem to me they worried about my injury, but rather the repercussions on them that I was injured. They suggested that I should rest and see if things got better. They did, and to my knowledge, never told my parents what happened. Neither did I. I did not want my seeing Scotty or going on trips with his family to be lost. No one ever asked me, I never had to tell. I honestly had so few places that I could go anyway, it was so important to be able to keep my opportunity to adventure with Scotty. My entire life, I've had migraines. In fact, migraines have always been a weekly part of my life as a young adult and through my adulthood. I would get headaches several times a week and a migraine potentially once a week. Sometimes I could go 2 weeks without a debilitating headache that would make me bedridden for 1 or more days at a time. Medications, they had a chance to stop headache progression, but they rarely could actually cure or remove a headache or its pain once it had begun. Mostly I just had to endure the headaches and migraines with little, if any, remedy. That was my life. Yeah, my parents were the antithesis of helicopter parents. They were more like duck parents, where mama duck travels and baby ducks follow. Or they get left behind and daddy duck just does whatever daddy duck feels like he wants to do. With needing to manage my life's challenges, seemingly entirely on my own, throughout my entire life, including childhood, and finding very little moral support from anyone in my family, I learned to take all of my bad experiences and distance myself from them by conceptually putting them in a bottle, sealing it, and putting it up on a high shelf that I would never possibly ever see again. But I had learned from them I could still access my bottles for their knowledge, but I would no longer hurt from them. The emotions were bottled away while the knowledge was available. I developed a sort of protection system that worked well for me. A lot of ways like how I sought God to give me protection from the supernatural. I learned to compartmentalize and control my anxieties and my fears through my own techniques and my approach to life and its adversities, if not downright horrors.